The 2026 Senate elections are now well underway. We have a ton of new polling data, especially from key states like Michigan and Ohio, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the 2026 Senate map based on the latest polling averages. And so we're just going to get right into it, starting off with the safe blue states. Democrats are easily going to win Oregon, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Massachusetts, where incumbent Democratic Senator Ed Markey leads by 19 points against Republican frontrunner John Deaton. Markey is now running for his third full term. He narrowly defeated Joe Kennedy III in a primary back in 2020. This time he is not going to face such a tough primary challenge, and so he is on track to winning another 6 years in the upper chamber of Congress. Meanwhile, Republicans are going to easily take Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. And so with these solid states now filled in for both parties, the GOP leads with 45 seats, Democrats at just 39. And so those are where all the states where either party is going to win by 15 points or more. There's really no real contest in those states. However, we're now going to move on to the likely states, and these are races that are going to be noticeably more competitive, and these are definitely races to watch. We're going to begin down south in Florida, where incumbent Republican Ashley Moody is running for her first full term. She was appointed earlier this year by Governor Ron DeSantis to fill the vacancy left by Marco Rubio, who became Secretary of State. And by all accounts, Ashley Moody is on track to win the special election here. The market odds on Kalshi give her a 90% chance. And so Florida will be placed into the likely Republican category. And now for the likely blue states, Democrats are going to win in Colorado, New Mexico, and Illinois. They're also going to take New Hampshire, at least based on the data that we have right now. According to the latest polls, Chris Pappas leads Scott Brown by 11 points, and this is going to be one of the most interesting races in the entire country. Now, on the Democratic side, incumbent Jeanne Shaheen has chosen not to run for re-election, and that has paved the way for Chris Pappas to become the presumptive Democratic candidate. On the Republican side, though, it is a lot messier, as you have Scott Brown, a former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, who has been in the race for the last few months now. He was supposed to be the nominee until just a few weeks ago when John Sununu, also a former U.S. Senator, announced that he may also be running in this race. He is, of course, a member of the Sununu family and is very popular in the Granite State. If he runs, he will very likely become the nominee, and he will have a very, very good chance at actually winning the general election. His odds are definitely better than Scott Brown's, and looking at the odds on Kalshi, Scott Brown has a 45% chance of winning. This is because we haven't even added in John Sununu as an option yet on the markets here, and when he is added, his odds will likely float around 50 to 60 points. And so for now, based on the polling between just Pappas and Brown, Democrats are ahead, but once John Sununu jumps into this race, a lot is going to change. But based on the data that we have now, the Granite State will be likely Democratic. We also have data from Virginia, where just like in New Hampshire, the Republican primary is a bit messy right now. We still don't really know who the GOP nominee is going to be yet, but based on the polling data so far, Democrats do hold a lead, with Mark Warner, the incumbent Democrat, running for a fourth term. On the Republican side, it could very well be Governor Glenn Youngkin. He would be the best nominee for the GOP in this race. He could also be eyeing 2028. He, of course, will be term limited from the governorship later this year, and so he does have a lot of options ahead of him, but he may actually choose to skip out on the Senate race, but we don't have confirmation yet, and for now he remains a potential candidate. If he does choose to jump into this race, though, he is a shoo-in for the Republican nomination, and he will certainly make this race significantly more competitive. But based on the preliminary data that we have right now from December 2024, Democrats lead by 7 points, and so Virginia will be placed into the likely blue category, the last likely blue state on this map. We do have a few more likely red states, though, and we're going to begin in Texas. And like I said, for the last two states, the Republican primary in Texas is pretty messy as well. Now, that is not the case across the country. There are actually many states where there are really messy Democratic primaries, but it's definitely not so on the Republican side. States like Michigan, for example, that we'll cover later on. But for Texas, Currently, John Cornyn leads by 5.5 points against Cullen. All red, John Cornyn is the incumbent Republican senator. He was elected back in 2001. However, he does face a primary challenge, and that, of course, comes from Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General. Now, John Cornyn is much more moderate than Paxton, and so Ken Paxton is appealing more to the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Meanwhile, John Cornyn is getting those traditional Republicans. And looking at the odds on Kalshi, Ken Paxton is at 59%. That is his odds to win the nomination. John Cornyn at 43. And so in terms of the betting odds, this is still a very, very close race. John Cornyn's odds were actually lower at one point. However, Ken Paxton has been embroiled in a little bit of a scandal with his wife, and so that's why his odds have dropped. The polling here is very close between Paxton and Cornyn, and so for now, we will still take John Cornyn as the incumbent, and that's what we have in the polling average, as there is still a very good chance that he will still come out on top among Republican voters. Colin Allred, though, he is the Democratic nominee. He ran for Senate against Ted Cruz in 2024. He didn't fare too well, losing to the incumbent Republican by nearly 9 points. And so it doesn't really matter who the Democratic nominee is going to be here, because they are not going to win this race. And so based on the polls, Texas will be likely red. Republicans on track to hold the state's other Senate seat. And the last likely state on this map will be Ohio, where we have, again, another very contentious race. This is another state where we have two senators running against each other, and that is between Jon Husted and Sherrod Brown. Jon Husted is the incumbent Republican. He was sworn in earlier this year alongside Ashley Moody. He, of course, filled the vacancy left by J.D. Vance. And so Jon Husted is now going to run for a full term in this special election. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, Sherrod Brown is going to be the nominee. There's no doubt about it. He is a former 3-term senator who served from 2007 until just earlier this year. He was voted out by voters and lost to Republican Bernie Moreno by just under 4 points. And now that he is running against the incumbent and is no longer the incumbent, he is not going to perform nearly as well as he did last time. He is very likely not going to be able to get his old job back. We also have Tim Ryan, who could have been the nominee here if he ran. He has chosen to not run for the nomination, and so that has paved the way for Sherrod Brown to lead the Democrats at the top of the Ohio ticket. But ultimately, Democrats are not likely to win here. The odds on Kalshi give them just a 38% chance, Republicans at 62. And so based on the polling data, Jon Husted leads by 5 points. Ohio will be the last likely state on this map. And so with both these solid and likely races filled in, Republicans are at 48 seats, Democrats at 44. The GOP is just 2 away from maintaining their majority. And so we're now going to fill in the lean states, races that will be decided by 5 points or less. These are the most competitive races in the entire country. There are 8 of them, and we're going to begin with the 2 where we do not have polling data from, and those are Minnesota and Maine. In Minnesota, incumbent Democrat Tina Smith is not running for re-election, but Democrats are still likely to hold onto the seat, although it can definitely get more competitive in the coming months. We will be waiting for the data from Minnesota, although in Maine, this is one of the most talked about races, even though we still don't have polling data from it, and that is the race concerning Susan Collins. Susan Collins is now running for her 6th term. She is the longest serving member of Congress in Maine's history, despite being elected over 30 years ago when she said that she would only run for 2 terms. And so Susan Collins has this huge incumbency advantage. She has also historically been very popular in Maine, although that has changed in recent years, especially after she voted to not acquit Donald Trump. And so Susan Collins is facing a tough challenge, but she can definitely edge it out. I mean, just look at what happened in 2020 when nobody thought she could win, when she was losing in every single poll leading up to November. She was down by over 5 points against Democrat Sarah Gideon. She doesn't just win the race, she wins by 8.6% in a state that Donald Trump lost in the same election by 9.1. Susan Collins outperformed Trump by 16 points in Maine. That is who Republicans want in the state going into 2026. She hasn't made up a decision yet on whether or not she is going to run. There's a good chance she will, though, as that's what she has been hinting at over the last few months. But for now, Maine will be lean Republican as long as Susan Collins doesn't drop out, because she has still a very good chance to win, even though she is not as popular as she once was. Coming on down now to North Carolina, where Tom Tillis, the incumbent senator, is not running for re-election. He probably wouldn't have been able to win the Republican primary even if he wanted to. He's very unpopular in the state. So this is actually a boost for Republicans that Tillis is no longer in the race. And so instead, it's going to be Michael Whatley, the former chair of the RNC. He resigned from his position just to run for this race. He has the full backing of Trump and the Republican Party. He is going to be the nominee on the Republican side. Meanwhile, on the left, Roy Cooper, the former governor of North Carolina, is set to be their nominee. And so we don't have competitive primaries in North Carolina at all. And so for now, Roy Cooper does lead in the race by 4.7%. A big reason for this is because Republicans still don't know Michael Whatley nearly as well as Democrats know Roy Cooper. Michael Whatley is more of a national Republican figure, but over the next few months, he is going to campaign and he is going to be seen all across the state. And that will, of course, boost the numbers for Republicans. This race is going to be one of the most competitive in the entire country, as even though Roy Cooper is a popular former governor, we saw what happened with Larry Hogan in 2024. He was also a popular former governor in a Republican state. He lost by 12 points, and North Carolina is still generally a Republican state. Trump won it in all three elections in 2016, in 2020, and in 2024. And so the Tar Heel state will be lean blue for now, but that is certainly set to change. Coming back up now to the Midwest, we have another open seat, this time in Iowa, where Joni Ernst is not running for re-election. She was very unpopular, and she probably made the right decision by not seeking a third term. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, it's likely going to be Josh Turek, a former wheelchair basketball player and a current member of the Iowa House of Representatives. According to Kalshi, he has a 70% chance at being at the top of the Democratic ticket. And so we do have polling from before Joni Ernst dropped out. Any other Republican is likely going to do better. We don't really know who the new GOP nominee is going to be yet, just because of how recent Ernst dropping out of the race was. And so 4% is the lead right now, although that is likely going to increase with a better candidate on the right. And so Iowa will be lean for the Republicans on this map, but I fully expect it to move on over into the likely category in the next few months. Next up, in Alaska, Dan Sullivan, the incumbent GOP senator, will be running for the third term. He was first elected back in 2014 and re-elected in 2020 by nearly 13 points. Now, his race this year will likely be a bit closer, as Mary Peltola is a potential candidate. She was a congresswoman for just over 2 years after the death of Don Young. She, of course, beat out Sarah Palin in her race in 2022. She also did lose her seat in 2024 to Nick Begich, and so she is now trying to return to Congress potentially by winning the Senate election. She is behind by 3 points according to the polling average. Dan Sullivan is on track to win a third term. I mean, this race is not going to go down to a 3-point margin, but it will be a bit more competitive than it generally would, as Mary Peltola is generally pretty popular in Alaska. And so for now, it's a 3-point margin, but ultimately I do expect the race to be not as competitive. And so Alaska will be lean red for now, but just like in Iowa, I do expect Republicans to perform better in polling that comes out in the next few months. And so now with 3 states remaining, we're going to tackle Georgia. I mean, Georgia is always one of the most talked about races in the country. It's always super close. I mean, last cycle, we got 2 super close elections in the Peach State, with Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock both being elected, defeating David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler to give Joe Biden and the Democrats the Senate majority. Now, this time, 6 years later, Jon Ossoff is on the ballot and is seeking a second term, and he will likely be running against Mike Collins, a former trucker and a current congressman. He has received the endorsement of Donald Trump, and according to Kalshi, he has a 52% chance of being the Republican nominee in this race. And looking at the polling data between Ossoff and Collins, Jon Ossoff leads by 3% on average, and you can see that after every single poll, Mike Collins has closed the gap. It was 5 points back in May, 4 points in June, and now it's 3. Republicans are making ground in the Peach State, and this race will only get more competitive from here. Georgia is simply one of the most competitive states in the country. It went to Trump back in 2016, it went to Biden in 2020, and then back to Trump in 2024. And so 2026, we will have a lot to see in Georgia, but for now, it remains lean blue based on the available data. And so before we get to Michigan, we're just going to quickly get Nebraska out of the way. The reason we haven't talked about it yet is because we only have one poll that shows Pete Ricketts, the incumbent Republican, leading by 1% against independent candidate Dan Osborne. The race is obviously not going to be this close when it comes down to it, but for now, it does seem like Dan Osborne is giving Ricketts a run for his money. Dan Osborne is an independent candidate who ran in 2024 against Deb Fischer and lost by 6 points. Now, this is actually a pretty impressive performance for a non-Republican in Nebraska, as of course he is an independent. He also received the endorsement of the Democratic Party. Democrats chose not to nominate their own candidate. Now in 2026, he's running against Pete Ricketts, the other senator in Nebraska. He just won a full term after winning a special election in 2024. He is very likely going to win the seat. This is not going to be nearly as competitive as the polls right now may suggest, but again, based on the data so far, Nebraska will be lean red. And finally, in Michigan, Republicans have a higher chance of flipping the seat in Michigan than flipping any other seat in the country. It is now an open seat, as incumbent Democrat Gary Peters has chosen not to run for re-election after almost losing in 2020 to John James by just under 2 points. And so now the Democratic primary is very crowded with 3 top candidates, although for now, Mallory McMorrow is the favorite. According to Kalshi, she has a 43% chance of being the nominee. And this is good news for Republicans as she polls the worst against the Republican frontrunner Mike Rogers. Mike Rogers will be the nominee here. He is a strong candidate who almost won in 2024. This is why Republicans want him, because even though nobody thought he would win, nobody gave him any money, Mike Rogers made it so that Alyssa Slotkin was elected to the Senate last year by less than half a percentage point. And so Mike Rogers is a former member of Congress. He was in the House for 14 years. He's received the endorsement of President Trump, and by all accounts, he is on track to win this seat and flip it for the Republicans. In both of the polls released so far, he leads by 4 points against Mallory McMorrow. And so Michigan is going to be lean red on the map, giving the GOP their 53rd seat. And so this is the 2026 Senate map based on the latest polling averages. Republicans holding on to their 53-seat majority. You can also see it here. This is a new website that I have early access to that will be released in the next few weeks. But thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like the video down below if you enjoyed it, and comment down below if you agree with these projections. Do you think Republicans will actually flip Michigan or Democrats take North Carolina? And also make sure you're subscribed for more content just like this leading up to the 2026 midterms.